Sometimes a random coincidence of circumstances leads to the death of a person. It seemed as though a cruel fate had taken a loving mother from her children and a faithful wife from her husband, but there were too many strange coincidences. As the police officers in Denver are used to knowing, coincidences are too suspicious when it comes to death. So they began an investigation that would take years to conclude. The 44-year-old mother and wife was found in her own bathtub. At first glance, it looked like she had simply passed out and suffocated. The woman died without an apparent reason, and there were no signs of an attack. This happened in March 2015, and the case became a challenging task for the police, as there were few clues and almost no traces. The investigation began to consider several scenarios at once. One of them suggested that the woman might have lost consciousness due to an overdose of medication. Given the absence of signs of an unauthorized person, the possibility of an accident was also considered. After all, Stacy Feldman could have simply slipped on wet tiles or suffered a seizure. However, many people were convinced it wasn't an accident. The police officers were unaware that it would take a tremendous effort to prove the murder case. Stacy Feldman was born in Indiana, USA, in 1970. She was the third child in the family, with sisters named Elizabeth and Susan. The children grew up in a friendly environment surrounded by understanding and love. The sisters supported each other throughout their lives and always found understanding from their parents. When Stacy's older sister became pregnant and had a child, the younger sister moved in with her without being asked to help raise the child. At that time, the older sister was divorced and solely responsible for herself. The family member lived in another city, so this decision was rather adventurous. For this purpose, the younger sister traveled from Chicago to be closer to her niece and her mother. Despite the increased workload, Stacy didn't complain about life. The pursuit of her own family and love was not foreign to her. During one of her travels, she met a man named Robert Feldman in Montreal. The spark ignited between them, and the young couple began a relationship. However, they met secretly from the family and got married in Montreal without informing their relatives because they anticipated family disapproval. Stacy took her partner's last name. The wedding was a small private party attended only by their closest friends. Afterward, the two moved to Denver, Colorado. Despite the secrecy, their bond proved strong. And the relatives didn't find out about the marriage right away. In the 10 years they were together, the marriage produced 2 children. At the time of the tragic events described, Stacy was a respectable, loving mother and a faithful wife. She actively participated in community life and got along with everyone. She had no enemies who would wish her dead. However, she suffered from an illness that enlarged her heart, and she was forced to take medication. On the morning of March 1, 2015, Stacy felt ill after a party with friends the night before, so she stayed in bed since the morning. Her husband took the children to church school alone at around 8:30 a.m. The mother was supposed to pick up the children at noon and later go with a group of friends to a small local carnival. However, when no one came to pick up the children at noon, the teacher called Stacy, but she didn't answer the phone. So, the school called her husband, Robert. After a while, he came to pick up the children and took them himself. They went to the carnival together, expecting to meet Stacy there. At 4 p.m., they returned home. The husband later recalled that when he returned with the children, he heard water running upstairs. He decided to check on his wife because she didn't respond to his calls. Robert went upstairs, opened the bathroom door, and was shocked to find his wife dead in the water-filled bathtub. He immediately sent the children to the neighbors so they wouldn't see their mother in such a state. Robert then called 911 and reported finding his wife's lifeless body in the bathroom. During the emergency call, he was instructed on first aid measures. The man followed the instructions, pulling his wife's body out of the bathtub onto the floor, where he tried to revive her while talking to the specialist on the phone. When the paramedics arrived, they moved the victim to a neighboring bedroom, where they again attempted first aid, but it was too late. Stacy was pronounced dead at the scene around 4 p.m. Shortly after, police officers were called to the scene. The officers arrived within minutes and immediately began investigating the circumstances of the death. In the first few minutes, they suspected that the woman had not died without assistance. The bathroom was clean and tidy, with no signs of a struggle. It was even too clean, which was one of the first reasons for the investigators' concern. Although Robert dragged his wife's wet body onto the bathroom floor, there were no traces of water on the floor. It seemed as if Robert had cleaned thoroughly before the police arrived. The towels were neatly hung in the bathroom, and the toiletries were scattered on the shelf next to the bath. They managed to find a damp cloth used to wipe the floor, but why would someone waste precious time cleaning instead of helping? Despite the cleanliness and the absence of signs of a struggle, Stacy had clearly suffered multiple injuries. Numerous bruises and contusions were found on her body, but none could be the cause of death. They all seemed too minor to injure the woman. The investigators questioned Robert to determine the circumstances of his wife's last days. He stated that they had been at a party at a friend's house the day before her death, where Stacy had smoked marijuana, which is legal in that state. She had also consumed alcohol. Therefore, she felt unwell in the morning and stayed in bed while her husband took care of the children. Robert also mentioned his wife's health issues, including cardiovascular problems, an enlarged heart, and arthritis. To combat the discomfort, Stacy took fentanyl, prescribed by doctors. Numerous spots were found on her body, small bruises that could have come from a fall or attempts to revive the victim. Could the woman have died from taking too much of the medication or losing balance and suffering an unfortunate fall? According to the police, only an autopsy could answer this question. In the meantime, the investigators discovered several other suspicious facts. A watch encrusted with gold and silver was found on the woman's wrist, a piece of jewelry Stacy used to signify her high status in her business. Why, then, would she shower with it and risk damaging the valuable jewelry? Although Robert actively supported the police, he was immediately considered the main suspect. After all, spouse murders are not uncommon, and he had found his wife's body. Superficially, everything seemed plausible, but the widow's behavior was somewhat unsettling. The investigation contacted the emergency dispatchers to find out how Robert behaved during the call. According to experts, he was very anxious and in a state of shock. The man screamed into the phone, was nervous, and even cried when he talked about seeing his wife's body. He tried to follow the instructions to provide first aid, but the widow's state of shock hindered the process even more, said the phone dispatcher. Despite the police's suspicions, Robert received much support from family and friends. However, in his conversations with the investigators, he answered some questions evasively and couldn't remember some details of the incident. Even more bizarre was his desire to refuse an autopsy and bury his deceased wife as soon as possible. However, the suspicion of murder ruled out this option. So Stacy's body was sent for an autopsy and ended up on the coroner's table. After examining the body, the expert could not determine the exact cause of the woman's death. According to the expert, Stacy might have simply suffocated after losing consciousness in the bathtub. However, she had numerous bruises and abrasions, most of which could have been caused when she was pulled out of the tub for resuscitation. Some of the bruises on her body matched fingerprints that might have been left when someone held her down. To get to the bottom of the truth, the coroner had to conduct further analyses and examine the victim's body more closely. More specialists were expected to deal with the case, delaying the investigation significantly and making the work of law enforcement more difficult. At this point, they had no evidence to point to the perpetrator. The toxicological examination found various drugs in her body, but they were all prescription medications the woman had taken on a doctor's advice. More importantly, no traces of alcohol or substances were found in her bloodstream that should have remained after consuming alcohol with friends the night before. This indicated that Robert had lied. This fact was the first conclusive evidence of his deception. Others followed later. The next discrepancies in the widow's statements were discovered after talking to the head and staff of the church school where the couple's children attended. The teacher claimed that it was not the parents but a family friend who was supposed to pick up the children. This was stated by the father himself when he received a call around noon. This was the second contradiction, as Robert convinced the police that it was the wife who was supposed to pick up the schoolchildren. It turned out that the man knew in advance that this was impossible and warned the teacher that another familiar person would pick up the children. Since this person did not show up, the teacher called Stacy and Robert. The man was very late, arriving only around 1 p.m. He postponed the pickup time for the schoolchildren several times. The father said his friend was busy and would come as soon as he was free. Stacy couldn't respond at that time because she wasn't home. Could the main suspect have used this time to clean up the traces of violence in his house? According to the teachers at the church school, Robert looked quite strange when he arrived. Despite the cool weather, he wore shorts and a t-shirt and seemed very irritated and excited, which was unusual for him. On normal days, he was always calm and reasonable. To delve deeper into this tangled case, the investigators requested recordings of the emergency call made by the main suspect. They wanted to find evidence or inconsistencies in the statements that could allow them to bring the man to justice. When the investigators listened to the call, they heard a toilet flush in the background. They suspected that the perpetrator might have been disposing of evidence at that time. They also heard no confirmation that the widower tried to administer first aid to his wife. He was explained how to perform CPR, but he repeatedly agreed with the operator without background noise or the heavy breathing typical of such actions. It seemed that the husband neither provided first aid nor tried to save his wife, probably because he was sure of her death and desired a tragic outcome. Gradually, a likely motive emerged. As the sole beneficiary of a life insurance policy, Robert could expect a substantial sum of $750,000 in the event of her death. The investigators then turned to Robert again. The police tried to determine why he lied about his wife's consumption of alcohol and other substances the day before her death. The investigators were also interested in the spots on her body that, although they appeared as if she had been pulled from the bathtub and given first aid, still looked suspicious. There was still the possibility that the bruises occurred during Stacy's struggle for her own life. The investigator examining the crime called Robert to discuss some of the points the coroner had identified. At the same time, the investigator wanted to ask some tricky questions that could lead the murderer to the truth. First, the investigator wanted to know how his wife had been lying, face up or face down, when he found her in the bathroom. The man couldn't remember these details. He immediately began to explain that he was in shock when he discovered his wife's body, losing his speech and memory. According to the widower, he immediately tried to pull her out of the bath, quickly and with all his might, perhaps not carefully because it was an emergency, causing bruises. It's known that a person who is unconscious is quite heavy, making it difficult to handle a breathless body, even for a strong man. This way, Robert tried to justify the appearance of bruises on his wife's body. However, the investigators did not receive concrete answers to their questions. They were then confronted with contradictory statements from the widower himself and his acquaintances. Initially, the family man claimed he was not at home because he left at 8:30 a.m. to take the children to school and returned only at 3 p.m. later. Witnesses reported seeing Robert at home that fateful morning. According to the man, he should have come by the house around noon to walk his dog. Could Robert have killed his wife during this time? It was also unclear how much time the man had spent in the house. It was possible that he had only used the time when the children's teachers tried to contact him to erase the traces of his crime. Thus, the main suspect's statement changed again. According to Robert, he took the children to the church school and stayed there for a short service. Then he went to training and changed at home afterward. At that time, the widower did not see his wife and stayed about 20 minutes, not disturbing her because he thought she was still resting after the previous night's party. The man also said he hadn't heard any water noises in the bathroom. The main suspect's statements did not convince the investigators. Robert described the events of the last few months in detail, but nothing seemed unusual. The police decided to see how he reacted by mentioning the questionable autopsy results. The widower claimed he didn't know what could have happened to his wife but believed she might have fainted for health reasons and simply drowned in the water. Again, nothing suspicious could be detected, but the police officers were ready to go to the limit. In fact, the only problem the coroner identified was a kidney condition that caused her kidneys not to function properly. The coroner could not identify any injuries that could have caused her death. The investigation stalled for 4 months. Finally, the Denver Police Department received new information confirming the suspicion that Robert Feldman was involved in his wife's death. The information came from an unexpected source, a woman who did not know Stacy. Her name was Susan McBride. According to the informant, she met a man on Tinder in 2015 named Robert Wolf, who claimed to be a meat dealer from Denver. The new witness said they began an online relationship that led to a single date. Although Robert described himself as divorced, Susan found out he was not who he claimed to be. Since she wanted to continue the relationship, she investigated Robert's personal data and found that Robert Feldman, a married man, was behind this name. She decided to email Stacy to accuse her husband of cheating. This message was discovered in the victim's personal records. Surprisingly, it was sent at 6:20 p.m. on March 1st, just a few hours before Stacy's death. The women exchanged brief messages and decided to call each other. A short phone conversation between them ended at 9 a.m. They parted on friendly terms. Stacy thanked Susan and promised to end her relationship with her cheating partner. After that, they didn't contact each other again. Susan continued to look for relationships online. 3 months later, she had another unsuccessful date. During this time, she remembered Stacy and wondered how her relationship with her partner ended. However, instead of finding the divorced woman online, she stumbled upon an obituary. She then inquired about the details of the crime that had occurred. She discovered that the murder was probably still unsolved. The obituary did not mention Stacy Feldman's cause of death. Everything seemed more than suspicious. A woman who received evidence of her husband's infidelity and whose life was insured for $750,000 died the morning she decided to end the marriage. Of course, the police did not consider this a coincidence. In October 2017, the Denver police brought in an independent pathologist, a renowned specialist in strangulation cases. After a reanalysis of the victim's body, the new expert could prove that she had died a violent death. It happened in the morning between 10 and 12 o'clock. The last text message from her phone was sent at 9:59 a.m., after which she was no longer able to pick up her children from school. According to the police, Robert visited her at that time, and an argument ensued. In a fit of rage, he strangled his wife and later made it look like an accident. It turned out that the previous coroner who conducted the autopsy had not done his job properly. He had overlooked a number of important pieces of evidence and had not conducted a complete autopsy. For the involved independent expert, the murder was obvious. In February 2018, Robert Feldman was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty and, in the absence of direct evidence, was placed under house arrest on a $1 million bail. However, this did not lead to a fair verdict. The justice system was stalled again and moved very slowly. Hearings in this case were postponed no less than 6 times. During the same period, the victim's family fought with the man over the inheritance. Thanks to the insurance payout, he could hire top-notch lawyers who were among the best experts in criminal cases, for which he paid more than $550,000. However, a probate attorney in Denver prevented Robert from using the money. Money from a criminally obtained insurance policy cannot be used for defense in court. Therefore, the widower had to rely on a public defender. He lost the case but subsequently appealed to the state Supreme Court. He won this procedure because the money he received was deemed legal. As a result, the accounts were unblocked, and the man could use the money in full. In the spring of 2020, he hired a new expensive lawyer who was even better prepared for such cases. The trial in this case was scheduled for April 2020. During this time, the defender secured bail for him. Robert was to remain under house arrest and could only leave the house for serious reasons, such as seeing a doctor. His defender was supposed to handle the delivery of groceries and all necessities. However, the suspect moved freely around the city and covered hundreds of miles on his bicycle. Due to the pandemic, the hearing was postponed again. During this time, Robert continued his normal life as if nothing had happened. The victim's family was shocked by what was happening. They sat back and waited for justice under the pressure of the closure orders. Meanwhile, the murderer roamed free and had nothing to fear. The man was constantly on his bike and registered multiple accounts under different names on dating sites. The widower enjoyed his life, meeting other women, and clearly had no intention of going to jail. It is known that he dated at least 5 women while under house arrest. One of them came home for a date and later decided to notify the police. The woman reported that she intuitively felt threatened throughout the encounter but didn't know what it was about and ignored her intuition. However, when they were near the pool in the backyard, Robert attacked and raped her. She initially decided not to report it to the police but became interested in the story of Robert Wolfe, who her new friend claimed to be. She managed to find out his real name and surname and also learned that the man might be involved in his wife's death. After that, she had no more doubts, and the victim of a rapist and murderer turned to the Denver police. The investigation, which lasted more than 3 years, finally gathered all the evidence required for an indictment. Several important witnesses also came forward, helping uncover the crime. However, even at this stage, the hearings were repeatedly postponed. Finally, they began in April 2022. Robert Feldman was accused of intentionally murdering his wife. The prosecution presented solid evidence that the man had long been beating his wife, but the cause of death was strangulation. The defense insisted it was an accident in the husband's absence. The woman had an enlarged heart due to illness and suffered a seizure, causing her to faint in the full bathtub. Since she could not free herself and no one was there to help, Stacy simply drowned. The blood stains found in the bathtub upon closer inspection were minor and attributed to her period. The trial lasted 9 days, after which the jury deliberated for nearly 3 hours. The result was a unanimous decision, and Robert was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, and all his appeals were rejected. Thank you for watching, and take care.